Hello, everyone. I'm Rishi Katz, and welcome to the Oval Table, where we discuss all things related to helping those who live and work within your business how to survive, thrive, avoid pitfalls, have more fun, and become successful faster. Getting advice and input from someone outside of your business can make a big difference, and that's what we seek to do for you each and every week. Here at the Oval Table, we believe that every voice matters, and we want to model how that works. Often the advice that makes the difference comes from where you least expect it. We seek every week to provide a lens for a different way to do business. So much more is possible when everyone's ideas make it to the table. Let me introduce you to our co-hosts, Vaughn Johnson, Doug Bowers, and Carl Walsh.
This week, we are presenting a retrospective of our first 2 seasons. We'll play a short clip from each of our guests and then comment on how that guest fit into our overarching message we've been delivering. Our goal is to present you with a varied set of principles and practices that will help guide you and your business to a high performance state. We started off the show with how should a business owner or manager be looking at their teams and how should they interact with them?
Identify what you're trying to accomplish. Identify what the needs are. Identify the business needs. Forget about the technology. I worry about that. But identify what you're trying to achieve. You begin to lay out the various different people that you need to achieve that objective. You identify people by looking at what they're able to do, talking to them, look at their personalities, how they get along with others, how they can see the business process. Again, focusing on the end need and focusing on the consumer and focusing on the user of the system.
I think there are certain enablers, and these enablers can be impediments if used in the improper fashion. But I look at the first thing is people, talent. You've got to have the right people. You've got to have people that will not be awestruck by growth, not be awestruck by, the numbers of products you have, for instance, or the numbers of stores, or the top line revenue. You've got to have the infrastructure with which to enable that, because that's really the engine that drives most of your businesses, is the infrastructure piece. You've got to have customers, of course, and that seems rather obvious, but when customers go away, then you realize that, wait a minute, I needed them in the first place anyhow to make this a viable entity. You've got to have product.
Leading in a crisis or in a chaotic type situation, if you find yourself in that, the first thing you want to think about is it's not a crisis. Not in a sense of the word, because when you start using terms like crisis and chaotic, it sets up a negative attitude. That all of a sudden is this overwhelming? And to me, what you have is a business problem. And what are you paid for? Solving business problems. And if you treat it that way, it becomes an immeasurable range. Many people can encourage and empower their staff to give them not positive feedback, but proper feedback on any situation. They're open to listening. They have great ideas and let them percolate among the staff. They use the staff. They use the Oval Table. Then you'll get every now and then that one that knows he's the smartest man in the room. And that can be very dangerous sometimes. Again, because you can have the wisest staff you can out there. But if you don't listen to him, it doesn't do any good. And I think it is so important for you as a subordinate of a person like that is to figure out, how do I get the right information across? How do I get him or her to buy into what is right, not what he's thinking right now? And so you have to be pretty skillful in your communication, in knowing what that person is like.
The world is separated very clearly into 2 different castes of people. We call it people who get it and people who don't. And it's really that simple for your staff. The staff that cares, they care because of it. You can see how they treat each other and how they treat people that they have relationships with. They're going to bring that with them, whether they're working or whether they're out playing at the beach.
I realized you just can't be doing things by yourself, period. We're never on this earth, on this planet alone. And so along the way, you're always going to find your guide, your mentor, people who can share their wisdom with you. And that is what inspires me to starting my own business and being someone else's light to guide them home.
We start with a group of people who we felt demonstrated the principle that in any healthy business, the elements should work in the following order. First, people, then process, then systems. And first, we turn to Jesse Stancarone, who, by the way, coined the phrase for us.
You know, for me, Jesse really nailed the importance of understanding that it's people first, because those people have to do something that contributes to the business in order to be successful. And what is the one thing that they do? They have a process. They understand what it takes to go from A to Z and what kinds of materials need to come into that process, what kind of time, what kind of duration per step. Is it a task-based process? Is it repetitive? Do you do the same process every time, or are there variations based on certain circumstances? And the point of underscoring that is, how can you possibly design a tool to support a process unless you understand what it is? And how many times have we seen in our separate careers where somebody says, I have a tool that you absolutely must have in order to support your business and make you successful or make you, distinguished, when in fact it doesn't support the process at all and has to be modified. And in the process of spending more money to modify an existing, tool to support your business, you're terrorizing your people because you're telling them that they have to work differently in order to support the tool.
That's what eventually happens so often, is that they have to change their process to fit the system, and that just doesn't work. Bill McFarland also chimed in, and he was talking more about growth, how you handle explosive growth, which he and I both experienced at the Disney store, going from a small number of stores. Actually, Bill went from 0 and up to the tremendous number of stores that we had, not just across the nation, but across the world. How do you have systems that support that when you're working in so many different countries, so many different states, counties, and cities, and all their different rules? How do you let your people work the way they always have? That was a real challenge for us.
One thing I thought that was exceptionally interesting about Jesse was that Jesse's background is he's called in to fix a IT department. And he's also called in if we're going to merge two companies together. And so what he does is I talk to the people one-on-one. I get their insights and suggestions. He doesn't start with the tool book. He starts by talking to the people. Who do I have to work with? What do they know? What are they capable of doing? And then he goes back into the process later. People come first, then process, then tools, in that order, not tools first. He was very explicit about that.
Jim Hearn came along and he talks about how when a crisis occurs, your tools aren't going to get you out of it. Your people are going to get you out of it. And how do you help them, manage them to take on what he said, never call it a crisis. It's a challenge, and it's a problem. And he actually says, and what are you paid to do? Solve problems. So solve it. And you've got the people and the processes to do it.
And then that kind of leads into Robert Simon, who, what kind of a problem did he have to solve? Well, he had a pandemic that shut down his restaurant. And how does he keep his people employed so that their families are intact and not strained as a consequence of the lockdowns? And how does he himself manage to survive during the course of those lockdowns? I was very inspired by Robert's view of the importance of his staff and how they're not his employees. We work together. I thought that was very impressive.
When he was commenting on hiring staff, I mean, some of his staff have been with him for over 30 years. So that's a big testament to him. It's also a testament to his staff. But the one thing he did say is that when we go to hire somebody, they either get it or they don't get it. And I can't teach them how to get it, how to get to relate well with customers. I can teach them how to put a fork on a table, but I can't teach them how to relate. And we can tell whether they relate well as to how they treat each other and how they treat their friends. So it's either an all the time, this is what we do thing, or it's an occasional act that you put on. We're not interested in occasional actors here.
Correct. And then, Jim Hearn, if you remember, he came back for a second show and he talked about not so much a manager working with their subordinates, but how the subordinates can actually work with the manager and what style that manager has. The charismatic leader, for instance, which he said, 4 out of 5, they're great. You'll follow them anywhere. But there's that 5th one where you wouldn't really want to follow anywhere. He talks about how you can manage that by understanding how they think and using the language that works for them. So not just managing down, but there's also a skill to managing up.
Yeah, you have to control them. You have to present information in a way that they can understand it. And you have to control them so they don't either hurt themselves or hurt the organization. An employee has to step up and do that. We find in small business, in the closely held business sector, that is a frequent thing that comes on.
There was an article in large businesses too. There was an article very recently talking about Bob Iger and his decision to leave the Disney company. And he said, I began to realize it was time to go when I went to a meeting and I found myself rejecting ideas from others more often than I used to.
Very, very interesting. Finally, in this group, we have Michelle Quay. And Michelle, I think, summed it up pretty well with just, if I can put it into one simple statement, that your people are your currency. Without them, you got nothing. And you got to treat them that way and respect them in that light, that they are everything to you. Remember, people, process, tools.
The other thing Michelle said to tie into that is that you as the leader have to do the same thing. You can't just simply expect your people to do it. You have to do the same thing. Michelle's a person with significant handicaps. That did not stop her. She went ahead and became a pharmacist at a major university medical center. And then she wanted to go to visit the Inca ruins in Machu Picchu. She rides the bus there, and they're going to have to walk for quite a ways to get in there. And the driver of the bus says, you know what? It'd probably be better if you just get back on the bus because you're going to have to walk faster than the donkeys.
For 4 days.
For 4 days. And her comment was, I'm going to walk faster than the donkey. I'm going to be there and make it happen. And if you have an employee team that thinks the same way, you've got a lot of power sitting there. But you have to let it run. You have to use it. And of course, that's where the oval table comes in.
Well, our next group talked mainly about managing change.
I remember driving to work one day in Cleveland, and I'm on the main highway going in from the west side suburbs. And I thought to myself, as an engineer, I started adding up in my head, like, how many hours am I spending in this car every day? And I think it might have been a day where there was a little bit of a traffic jam or something. And I added it up and I got up to like 300 hours conservatively. And I was like, whoa, that's like 2 man months, that I'm spending in my car going 45 minutes into town and 45 minutes back every single day. And I thought, wow, what a waste. And so a couple of weeks later, and a couple of conversations with Govind, I was like, you know what? Let's save the money on the office. Let's go virtual. And we can do that. We already had a few of the tools. Not everything worked out. It was a little bumpy at first, but yeah. So we pulled the trigger, put out a press release. went virtual, and the rest is history.
I think in this particular case that management was putting roadblocks in the way or making things difficult.
I don't think he was putting them there, but he wasn't knocking them down, if that makes sense. He wasn't helping where he could help. I don't think he was doing anything on purpose to put them up, but maybe he didn't know how to knock the roadblocks down. I don't know, but he allegedly was an experienced manager who had been around for a long time. I think he was challenged on what do I do with this?
And sequestering the carbon, activists relating to climate change should love the idea that, I don't think I'm overstating this, I've heard other scientists refer to it. If all the cropland that's now growing these major crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton in the US, and especially if you did that around the world, of course we're not going to get 100%, but if it did, we would be taking more carbon out of the air than all the automobiles and diesel trucks could even put into the air.
And that is the fact that a conversation is not a contract. And I always tell the people in family business, do you realize that people in family business lie? They do, they lie. They say, work hard someday, this will all be yours. Or, I'm going to retire. And then there's the dreaded, you don't have to worry about your brothers and sisters. They've got their jobs. They're not interested in the business. With family, more not less needs to be in writing. And if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist.
Managing change. How do you handle it? And it was very interesting to find out that there's all kinds of change involved in a closely held business. And we'll go through them one by one to discuss those various types of change.
One thing I found very interesting about Hansborough is that his fundamental assumption, his fundamental principle is, I don't have to keep doing things the same way we've been doing things before. I can make change, and the change can be fundamental, and the change can be all-encompassing throughout the organization. And so before there was COVID, before there was anything else, Mike sat back and says, I don't want to do business. I don't want to run my business the same way I've always run it. I want to run it different. In other words, I want to be virtual. And that opened up the chance to have programmers be the best programmers that they were in a certain area all around the world, instead of having it only pick from his city or cities surrounding his city. And that opened up the business to make all kinds of other changes that became fundamentally positive. He wasn't strictly about it's me. He was about also setting these other people up around the world in business so that they could actually go on and make a great living for themselves. So he was doing what we advocate you do inside of business, and that is make the employee dreams a reality. Let them have their success too, because their success will breed your success.
And he goes even further in that he made a fundamental change in his relationship to his vendors. He actually made them partners and helped them set up a business of their own that would work perfectly with what he needed, and help them create a whole business, which is, I think, a rather remarkable concept. This is the first time I've heard of anyone doing this, and I think it's a fabulous idea. Absolutely terrific.
Mike didn't realize that was critical factor number 5, forming a partnership with your vendors.
Exactly. And I mean, he took that literally. He took that literally. He formed a partnership with his vendors.
And he didn't get that from us. He got that from himself, wanting to make a change to his business. And it was a natural change for him, and it's worked really well.
Next, we have Maria Mcallen, who talked about working in a different cultural climate and how she could break through some of the barriers that she found there, particularly barriers that included, quite frankly, gender barriers. That would a team of men work with a woman who was supervising them? How would that work out? And she goes into great detail on her experiences in India. First, by taking people one by one, talking to them, like Jessie Stancarone says. And she got a tremendous amount of information out of them that their own manager could never have gotten out of them, because they were willing to talk to her, but were a little afraid to talk to him and let him know what was wrong. It was very eye-opening, that interview.
One thing to realize about Maria, who's a project management specialist, is what her setup was, what the constraints she had. Before she went there, someone sat down with her and says, look, this is the only way you can function there. You have to work this way. You can only ask these kinds of questions. This is the culture. This is the problem. And then when she gets there, the manager does the same thing. This is our culture here. And she says, well, can you give me a chance? Can you give me a chance to do something special? And she proceeds to do something special. So if you're a manager in a business, you say, well, I can't do anything because I got these constraints. Well, your constraints are not as big as hers were. And she was able to pull it off. So I suggest you can also do it.
And it's a nice contrast with Mike Hansborough, because he went virtual very early. Now Maria's experience was a few years ago, and she had to get on a plane and go to India. And you see the difference between them there. And I think a lot of companies are going to go the way of Mike Hansborough going forward. Next is Randall Reeder. And what he's talking about is changing a whole sector, probably the most important sector in this country, which is agriculture. Doug, you're a bit of a specialist in this. Give us your views on that.
Well, what Randall was doing, remember, he's from the Ohio State educational system. So he's not just a hobbyist. I mean, he's actually a technician in the area. And what he's trying to do is change how farming is done, especially field farming, row crop farming, has historically been done to a different system that not only benefits the farmer because it reduces his inputs, in other words, his costs, but it also produces a better product for the consumer. And it also is a function of the environment and improvement to the environment. So his suggestion to benefit the environment, if you're really concerned about it, then his suggestion is to improve the regenerative farming practices of farmers throughout the Midwest, throughout the world for that matter. And you will sequester more carbon in the soil where the microorganisms and the plants can use it than you will any other way. So we don't need carbon trading platforms. What we need is empowered farmers and assisting them with financing and assisting them with education in order for them to carry it on. And it needs to be done around the world, not just here.
And then we move on to Jolene Brown, who is also a practicing farmer. And what she specializes in beyond that is working with families who have a closely held business, their farm, and almost all of the farms in America are family owned, more than 95%. But what happens to that small business when whoever has been heading it up either passes away or retires? And usually it's the family that's getting involved here and all those family dynamics. And the point she kept hammering on is you need to get it set up beforehand and you need to get it in writing. Any agreement that is not done in writing simply doesn't exist. And you need to get that all sorted out in advance to prevent all the strife and all the dynamics that smash families, that splinter them when this kind of event happens. You got to manage that change in advance.
Her focus is on farmers because she knows farmers because she's been farming for years herself. With 95+% of all farms in the United States being run as a closely held small business, so often the setup is keep working for me until I retire and then all this will be yours. That's one setup. The second setup is your brothers and sisters don't care about the farm, only you do, so everything will work out fine once I'm gone. And neither of those assumptions have any reality whatsoever. And not only in the farming do they not have reality, they do not have reality in most closely held businesses. Because what happens is, as a manager, you're leading people along and you're saying, this is going to happen. And then you get to the end and you say, no, I don't want to do that anymore, after they've invested all this career time in you, and then they're upset and then they want to leave. And so your talent goes out the door. So you really can't do it that way. You have to have a succession plan in mind. And if you're going to sell a business, for that matter, you have to make the business saleable. And oftentimes that's not the case. It's oftentimes, well, I think it's a great business. You think it's a great business, but everybody else looking at it from a cold standpoint, including your children, don't think so. If you want to make that transition happen, then you have to plan for the transition, which is what her point is.
So to wrap this up, we have talked about all the different ways that a company can change. We've talked about shutting a business down, selling a business, growing a business, transitioning ownership in a business. All of these things come into play, and they need to be planned for and managed very carefully. Our next group of guests discussed how small business can actually change society.
Our prior GM, Miriam Stepanian, would always say, if there's no margin, there's no mission. You're out of business. That is absolutely true. Just because we're a nonprofit organization doesn't mean that we are going to be operating in the red. You're not going to be around. There are too many examples of stations, of nonprofit organizations, even public radio stations, that have faced huge challenges and have gone under. The license winds up getting sold and things go south. So you absolutely have to have a strong sense of both your mission, but also the bottom line.
The legislators, all of them believe they are helping. They all go to, whether it's going to Sacramento here in California or Washington, D.C., they will go with the idea, with the intent that they're helping. Yet the majority of them have never, ever ran a business. They've never made a payroll. They've never signed in front of a payroll check. They've never had to deal with cash flow. And so as a result, they pass legislation without really digging into understanding the consequences and how it impacts small business. So I would say their intent is good. However, quite often the outcome is not what they expect. It does not necessarily help small business move forward and achieve its goals.
So it's that beautiful pebble that spreads out, and it's basic capitalism, really, on a tiny scale. That, she created a business which grew and grew, and she employed other people. And of course, those women that she's employed now have more money to spend with other businesses. And so it uplifts the whole community.
We start off with Joe Moore.
This last group's theme, if you will, is how a small business can affect a society. And we first heard from Mr. Joe Moore, who is president and general manager of KDPR FM 89.3 in Fresno, California. KDPR, Valley Public Radio, is the national public radio affiliate for all of Central California in its 43rd year. And what Joe really got to quickly was that a nonprofit, which KDPR is, has to operate like a business. You have to have a margin or you don't have a business. We put Joe into this category of affecting a society because, well, radio does that, doesn't it? I mean, if you watch Fox News, are you having input from one point of view? If you listen to NPR all day, are you having input from another point of view? So definitely broadcasting does and always has affected a society. But in Joe's case, what's interesting is it is a nonprofit. So it's not selling, my pillows here. What they're talking about is supported partly by the federal government through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And that kind of led us to Mr. Gary McKenzie. Gary has consulted, was it 3 presidents? Around the idea of small business and how small business needs federal support. And he also talked about how federal support can sometimes can suffer what's known as the unintended consequences, where legislation is supposed to be a good thing and it doesn't turn out to be that way. So that was Gary McKenzie. Thoughts there, guys?
The great thing about Gary McKenzie is he showed how the needs of small business being, if it's met, has a ripple effect that goes out beyond small business. For instance, he spearheaded the work to get the inheritance tax changed. Now, that was primarily for the agricultural sector because they were being destroyed by the inheritance tax. But that rippled out to everybody else then. It's not just small business. And there are a lot of people, including me, who were affected by that change in the inheritance tax rule. So small business can actually affect and create legislation that goes well beyond their needs and to the needs of the society as a whole.
From an accounting and tax perspective, and Gary's in the accounting tax business, it is hard to overestimate the importance of moving that estate tax exemption from 600,000 to 5 million, because it affects every small farm. It affects every closely held business that doesn't have the cash to pay 40% tax on everything over 600,000. They don't have it. So the business ends up getting destroyed. The employees have to go find other jobs, and nothing good happens from that. So by moving the estate tax exemption up, it allows closely held businesses to continue multi-generational, and especially true with farming. So that is an extremely important thing that he accomplished. In fact, if that's the only thing he ever accomplished is an entire career, that's a tremendous achievement right there.
Next, we go into Karen Wright. Karen Wright has created we'll call it a charity because it is, but it's a charity with a real difference, where they go into rural areas of Uganda and make microloans to women in villages. And those microloans are made to help them create a small business. It starts out at $50, and they've been able to get dozens and dozens and dozens of these women on their feet, doing a business, putting food on their family's table, and they're supported by a group. That's how this has been structured. And that group is responsible for paying the loan back. Actually, the person who took the loan is responsible, but if they can't do it, the group is responsible. So there's actually some accountability to people they know, to people that they work with. Almost all of their loans are paid back, in fact. So that money gets recycled to give loans to other people. Now, how are they changing the society? They're bringing capitalism to a place where almost none exists. They're bringing self-respect and pride to people who never had it before, who were told that they are there to cook and wash clothes. That's all they're supposed to do. What's happening is there's another ripple effect here, because other people, the men in the family, the children in the family, are seeing what's happening, and they're getting the idea, well, that's pretty good. Maybe I can do that too. And over time, these kinds of changes, these kinds of attitude changes can really change a culture.
If you're concerned about women being successful, if you're concerned about helping them equalize their pay or other considerations in that manner, helping to fund this organization does exactly that. And if you're going to try and make a change in society, what better place to make a change in would be bringing Africa out of the dark ages and bringing them into a viable organizational functioning area. And whole, this is critical factor number 6, be a positive force in your community wherever your customers may be. And this is Karen on the ground doing something extremely positive, giving them an ability to make money, giving them an ability to feel special and being confident in themselves that they can go forward. That affects them, that affects their children, eventually affects their husbands. And so This is a tremendous way to actually have a positive effect. You helping them is actually a virtuous act as opposed to a virtuous thought.
And our final group for this year-end review is our group that we put into sales and marketing.
And I say to my audiences in sales or any other role in life, the key to connection is conversation. The secret of conversation is to ask questions. And the quality of the information you receive depends on the quality of your questions.
We do age demographics, we do socioeconomic demographics, and we try to develop, it's not really science, but it's more develop relationship metrics that we can use and say, given a customer's particular characteristics and demographics, this is how we think they will act at some point in time. So as they get close to the point at which they have the ability to just go to another provider, cable company we try to be proactive and reach out to that customer and offer that customer something that we think they will take and go, okay, yeah, maybe I'll stick around and sign another contract.
While ruminating on this idea, I had another kid. And one day while I was on maternity leave with her, I came downstairs and I told my husband, I think I want to start a dried pasta business. I still can't find what I want. And he said, what do you know about making and drying pasta? I said, absolutely nothing. He's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. You should do that then. And here I am almost 7 years later.
I got thrown out of the UK's biggest retailer for not reducing my price on a £1 million contract. And at that time, this retailer was the third largest in the world after Walmart and Nordstrom. It made me wake up to the fact that I was quite a good negotiator, but quite good wasn't good enough.
Have your own self-introduction. And I might add, because I am a small business person, it's not an elevator pitch. And trust me, no one gets into that small moving room to hear you go on about yourself. So this whole idea of an elevator pitch actually, it cracks me up and irritates me. But what you want to do is have a comfortable, confident self-introduction that's conversational, not a pitch.
The first person on our clips was Patricia Fripp. And what she specializes in is getting her message out. Doug, how did you feel about Patricia's episode?
Lots of people think that I'm starting from a low point, or I'm starting from not many resources, and I really can't do anything. Woe is me. Okay, well, let's look at Patricia. She starts off as a shampoo girl in England. She moves to the US with very little money. She develops a hairstyling business for men, becomes a recognized expert in it, and then transitions from that to being a coach for speakers and marketers and CEOs of businesses. What more humble beginning could there be than that beginning? And what more pinnacle could there be of reach than her pinnacle? I think that's important for people to realize, that you really can do things. I mean, you can start selling chicken when you're 60 years old, for crying out loud. I mean, so you can do things, but you have to do them.
And what's really remarkable about Patricia is that she learned this talking to her executive clients when she was a hairdresser. She pumped them for information and got all of her basic principles, all of her basic ideas down, learning from the best, the people who were out there doing it, which makes a great case for always having a mentor in your business. Always go with the best. And that's what she did.
She did that by asking good questions.
Exactly.
She didn't talk about herself while she was cutting somebody's hair. She knew who was sitting in that chair, and she asked good questions, and she got good answers.
Well, next up is Mike Zarello. Mike Zarello is representing the cable industry amongst our group. And really what he talked about is how they first of all, deliver to their customers and how they manage to keep their customers once they have them. They study the behavior of their customers. They study the market assiduously, and they study the demographics to understand what does the customer want. So they're always innovating their lineup, their programming, even their pricing and their bundling. Vaughn, what do you have to say about Mike?
The thing that Mike and I talked about briefly was the idea that broadband as a revenue stream, broadband has actually become really kind of the more important revenue stream in a cable plant than television. A lot of that has to do with the way the television is being delivered now, over the top. You know, you have an Apple TV device, you have a Roku device, you have an Amazon Prime device. So there's that cable cutting thing that we talked about, you know, cord cutting, and how people are moving over to over the top streaming services. And the streaming services require bandwidth. So it's an ever-changing and dynamic industry, the cable industry, definitely.
So the cord cutting has actually, in a way, because the cable companies have pivoted into the broadband service, the cord cutting actually works for them too, because as he outlined for us, the broadband may be a smaller part of their total revenue, but it's a huge part of their profit. And that's how they make it work.
One thing that impressed me about Mike was, I'll introduce it this way. I was in a Walgreens the other day, and I was trying to buy 2 units of something because the second unit had a sale on it, was cheaper than if I bought only 1 unit. But they only had 1. So I went to the store and I said, what price are you going to give me on this one, on the 1 unit, because you don't have 2? And I said, well, it's full price. I said, so you want me to be unhappy? That's our policy. Crying out loud, that's your policy? Now, Mike, on the other hand, has realizes that some of the customers that he has, some of the subscribers have difficulty in the pandemic period. So he's willing to restructure their contracts in order to better suit them and keep them as a customer. What else should you be doing as a manager of a small business but trying to keep your customer? Mike showed you how to do it on a big scale. And if he can do it with thousands of customers, presumably you could do it if you have a few hundred.
Now let's talk about someone who works on a somewhat smaller scale, which is Leah Farazani, the pasta queen of Pasadena. Leah has decided to go into totally organic pasta. She creates the dried pasta that you can then buy in your store or online. And she does it by taking her technology backwards into how it used to be made. I can tell you, as one who has tried it, and I know Vaughn has tried it as well, it's different and it's measurably better what she does. She is creating a better product. She's creating a premium product, and she's putting a premium price on it. And that's another route that a small business can take. People always think about drive the price down, drive the price down, drive the price down. Well, a small business can survive very nicely by driving the quality up and the price up. And that's what Leah has done very, very effectively.
Bear in mind, as we just heard her say, Leah knew nothing about making pasta. She didn't know how to do it. She didn't know dried pasta from whatever. She just had a passion for getting the kind of pasta that she enjoyed when she was in school and when she was traveling. And it was, I can't find the pasta that I'm looking for, so I'm going to make it. And her husband said, well, what do you know about making pasta? She goes, absolutely nothing. He goes, well, in that case, you should go do it. He said, that's also an example of what Doug was just talking about. You can do it if you do it, if you set your mind to achieving.
Critical factor number 4 is to enrich and reward your employees. And Leah's position is, unbeknownst to her, that was our critical factor. I want my people to be paid a fair wage. I want them to have fun at work. We have dance parties when we're making pasta. And so we wanted to test that concept. So we actually went there. And she was in the back fooling with something else, but her other people were waving at you, talking to you, even though they were in the pasta making room and they were behind a glass wall, they were still noticing that I was standing there. And then when a young girl that came out to talk to me, she was very happy I was there. You can't have that kind of environment if you're not enriching and rewarding your employees. And it just shows, it just jumps. So when we go out to a business, we can almost sense that there's a problem within the first 5 minutes of being there, because by the way that people are acting, the noise and the smell and the sounds that happen, and you can tell.
Well, next up was Derek Arden. Derek Arden is an expert on negotiating. He actually lives in the London area, but negotiating is negotiating, and everything he had to say transferred very nicely over to us. And I had several aha moments talking with him, things like making sure that you take a break during a negotiation to discuss, not with the other side, but with your people. And yes, have other people in the room who, while you're doing the negotiating, they're watching body language. They're paying attention to how the person is reacting to what you're saying and how they're saying what they're saying. And you go out, he called it going out to the balcony and discuss where you're at and where the other side. That was a tremendously important idea that I've never heard before.
His first factor is be prepared when you go to a negotiation. Do your homework ahead of time. Bring people with you who can offset you. Bring someone who's an observer, just taking notes about what's going on in the room while you're talking. Take someone else with you who knows what the agenda is going to be and is able to follow the agenda and cover in when you've missed something, and you will miss something. That will happen. And so you need this kind of support going forward into a negotiation. When we talk to people, we talk to vendors all the time. We know in the first minute whether they're prepared for this meeting or not. And if they're not prepared, we're annoyed. And your customer's annoyed also if you're not prepared to negotiate with them. They want you to be able to move forward in a professional and organized manner. They feel comfortable with that. So why not do that?
Derek also is very much a proponent of the win-win negotiation. Rather than pounding the other side into submission, that you work towards something that does work out for both sides. Why? Why should you do that? Because you're creating a lasting business relationship. It isn't just a one-off deal. You want to be able to do work with this person again.
If you don't form a win-win negotiation, if you form one where you have pounded the other side and you go away thinking, boy, I've won, you're going to pay for that and pay for that and pay for that. You're never going to stop paying for that mistake.
And then that leaves us with Suzanne, who takes everything that we've just said about relationships and about negotiation and puts it into practice in working the room.
That's right. When you show up at that trade show, when you show up at that conference or convention, when you're at the Chamber of Commerce, how do you get it going? How do you start the conversation? And Susan does get into some heresies here, according to a lot of people. The main one being, you don't use an elevator pitch. You introduce yourself, put a face on yourself first. And as the conversation goes on, you can direct it towards business. But if you start off with business, the person is immediately back on their heels and putting up a defense. Not everyone believes in that. I have to tell you, I go along with Susan on that one.
As a highly skilled and practicing introvert, my other co-hosts are laughing, Susan is a game changer. She says, why don't you change the game? Why don't you change your mindset? So when you go to an event, don't think of yourself as a guest and you have to try and meet people. Don't look at it that way. Look at yourself as a host and go there and be a host. Play the job of host. That is so much easier than playing the job as a guest. And talk to people, get them things, show them things. Did you try that cake? What did you think of that cake? how are you getting through in the pandemic? And forget about what you do. Just talk to them and set up a relationship, because from that relationship, everything else becomes positive.
And be real and sincere about it. When you say, how are you doing? Yes, be sincere. How are you doing?
Yeah, she didn't say, how are you doing as a typical communication opening? She was saying, how are you doing with this pandemic? How's your company handling this? And so you're on a different level when you talk like that. You're not talking as a typical throwaway conversation piece, but you're talking about some real information, and you're likely to learn something. The one other thing that you pointed out, and we experienced off mic before the interview, when you show up at something, whether it's on a Zoom call or whatever, when you show up, it allows the incidental connection to be made. And you find out that, gee whiz, we have something in common. We like certain things, or we did certain things. We've had certain work experiences, whatever. We have something in common. And so oftentimes that thing in common is my parents knew that person. And so we have something that we otherwise couldn't make. And then you can build a relationship from that. If you don't show up, then you can't let the incidental connection can't be made because you didn't show up.
Who do you talk to first? How do you decide who to talk to? And if you're one of those people, like I was for many years, you love to be a wallflower in these events, pick the other wallflower. Go over to them. Start the conversation with them. Here's the thing. It's not only effective, but it's also kind, and they will remember it. They will remember you, because you're the one who extended yourself to them and brought them into the party.
Susan says, if you're going to a certain group, research the group ahead of time. Know who the people are, know what the group's about. That's the same thing Derek said. Before you go into negotiation, you do your homework so that you know what you're going to face when you go in there. Susan says the same thing on a different subject area, but it's the same process, it's the same technique.
And it's the same thing Mike Zarello said. Know your audience, know your customer, know what they want. And it's the same thing that Leah said. You know, I'm making a premium product at a premium price for discerning people. And it's the same thing that Patricia Fripp has said, which is to always know what is the next question that I'm going to ask that's going to give me the most valuable information.
Well, I think that's a running theme through pretty much almost everything that we have done. You have to know your team. You have to know your customer above all. You may think you have the greatest product in the world, but what does your customer think? That's the only thing that matters.
When it comes right down to it, having a dream you believe in, working smart on accomplishing that dream is what we have been all about in this entire show series. This show in particular was produced and assembled at our oval table. We didn't have consensus when we started, but over time we built consensus. We are doing exactly what we advocate you do. And so we hope you will take this example and go forward with it. But as we come to the end of our 20th show and the end of our second season, we would be remiss if we did not stop to thank each of our guests who have joined us at our oval table. They have freely shared their insights and experiences with us and with you, our listeners. We are all better off because of them. We would also be remiss if we did not thank you, our listeners, who have supported us in our efforts to bring you insights and information to help you run your business. Our goal from the outset has been to bring you our best ideas and observations designed to empower your success. This might be a great time for you to revisit our past shows and you have missed. Coming up next season, we will start things off with a bang and focus on how to get your business off to a positive start and focus on those things that will drive your success. And as always, we remain open to any suggestions you have and your continued discussion with us as we move forward. We invite that discussion. And as for me, I can't be thankful enough or impressed enough with Carl and Vaughn, who have joined me in this adventure. Every day, as we work together, I am impressed just how much knowledge they bring to our oval table and how much they sharpen our insights and the thrill of our mutual experience. And as for Vaughn, Carl, and myself, we wish you a happy new year and look forward to being with you at our next show on January 4th, when our guest expert will be the outstanding and nationally known expert on business relationships, David Knorr. It is going to be an exciting season 3. Until then, stay safe and enjoy your success.